proceed to the questions. We have a number of questions from our question and answer chat box as well as on our live Facebook live streaming both on the CHR Facebook page and the FNF Facebook page. But first question I'd like to ask everyone, particularly siguro muna kay Attorney Tom and kay Mike, but everyone can be free to jump in and answer the question. The first question comes from an anonymous attendee. Ang sabi niya, what will be the remedies of the suspect or accused to avoid arrest? What rights should he or she invoke to protect himself? But I guess given na batas na ang anti-terrorism law, I'd like to broaden the question in answering. At this point, since alam natin na may threat of being tagged as a terrorist, what can we do to protect ourselves? Perhaps you can start with Attorney Tom.
Magandang tanong yan, Mark. Let me answer that question. I think the question has two components. The first one is what you should do to avoid arrest. Medyo mahirap yan sagutin. Of course, obviously, you can avoid arrest by not performing illegal acts or acts that are crimes under the law. Pero yun nga yung punto na sinasabi ng ilang mga petitioners or halos lahat ng mga petitioners about the Anti-Terrorism Act, in that the law is not very clear. It's vague. So katulad ng sinabi ni Attorney Mike Navallo kanina, when the law is being implemented, because it is vague, according to the petitioners, then the law enforcement authorities might interpret the law in a wrong or erroneous manner because it's not clear. And that is why we're saying also in the amicus brief of CHR that the law violates what we call the right to substantive due process. Yung due process kasi may component yan o may bahagi yan na kailangan malaman ng tao kung ano talaga ang bawal. So, pero nagiging tricky o nagiging problematic yan kung ikaw mismo, pag binasa mo yung batas o na-inform ka, katulad ng discussion natin ngayon, ano ba talaga ang terrorism? Hindi ba? So, an example will be, one of the acts there is let's say creating fire. When you create fire and then you cause the intention is to cause damage, terrorism na ba yun? Baka nagsunog ka sa likod ng iyong bakuran, terrorism na ba yun? And then you cause damage. Is that your purpose? Kumbaga, the other complication is, ano ba ang purpose mo? How will you know what your purpose is, di ba? So, yan ang medyo sinasabi nilang problematic, And that's why law enforcement authorities might construe or interpret, pwede nilang mahinuha or maisip na, uy, teka, baka terrorism na iyon. The second part of or component of the question is about your right. Katulad nga po ng sinabi natin, napakarami po sa ating konstitusyon, marami hong bahagi iyan na sinasabi, ano nga ba ang karapatan mo kapag ikaw ay naaresto? Ang karapatan mo, siguro pwede kong sabihin, unang-una mo dapat malaman ay dapat alam mo kung ano ang iyong karapatan sa ilalim ng ating konstitusyon. Para kung sakali ilayo ng Diyos, ikaw ay maaresto, alam mo kung ano ang iyong gagawin. Ano ang iyong pwedeng gawin. Kasama na dyan yung pwede ka namang manahimik, pwede kang tumawag ng abogado, walang karapatang saktan ka, at marami pang iba. Kung ikaw naman ay halimbawa inimbitahan sa presinto, may karapatan kang tumanggi. May karapatan kang magsabi na wala namang warrant, so hindi mo ko dapat dalhin dahil iniimbitahan mo lamang ako. Hindi mo ko pwedeng kunin basta-basta na lamang. So, yan yung mga bagay na I think dapat aware tayong lahat, mga mamamayan, lahat ng tao na nasa Pilipinas, tungkol sa ating mga karapatan. Kasi kung alam mo ang iyong karapatan, if you know your rights, kumbaga, you also know how to protect yourself. I think that's the best thing that you can do. Baka may gustong idagdag si Attorney Mike?
Actually, napag-usapan yan sa oral arguments. Anong gagawin mo kapag hinuli na? And considering nga na pwede yung warrantless arrest. So, ibig sabihin, Kahit walang warrant pero may authority from the Anti-Terrorism Council, anong pwede mong gawin? Kasi usually kapag may warrant of arrest, ibig sabihin na file na yung case sa korte. So pwede ka ngayon sana pumunta sa korte, mag-file ka ng motion to quash yung arrest warrant or even yung information na final sa'yo, kukwestiyonin mo yung kaso na sinampa sa'yo. Pero kapag wala pang kasong sinampa and sa ilalim nga ng Anti-Terrorism Act, pwedeng umabot ng 24 days, aantayin mo ba yung 24 days bago pumunta sa korte? Hindi, ang gagawin mo, pwede kang mag-file ng petition for issuance of a writ of habeas corpus para i-compel ng court na ipresenta ka o kung sino man yung hinuli, ipresenta sa korte at i-justify yung pagkakahuli. Kaya nga lang, ang implication nito is that sino ngayon ang may burden na patunayan na meron kang right na violate. So, ang lalabas kung sino nagpetisyon, di ba? So, tuloy, instead na may presumption of innocence ka na, teka, hindi nyo ako pwedeng hulihin hanggat merong warrant mula sa court na dumaan sa korte at na-determine ng korte na may probable cause para ipahuli ka, ang mangyayari tuloy ngayon, ikaw pa ang pupunta sa korte at sabihin mo, wala silang basihan para arestuhin ako. So 'di ba, parang merong pagkakabaliktad. Yun yung isa sa lumabas sa interpellation ni Justice Kagiwa at ni Professor John Molo. So ganun yung situation that we are in right now. So tingnan natin kung paano ito didesisyonan ng Korte Suprema.
Maraming salamat, Mike. At this point, I'd like to throw in the question to Commissioner Louie. There's a question coming from Leo Paolo Diay. Sabi niya, how can the CPP-NPA be a terrorist if they adhere to a certain political advocacy? And yung next question niya is regarding designation. What is the difference between a revolutionary from a terrorist? But I guess the broader question is that kung lahat na lang ay pwede mong itaga sa terrorist because of a difference in opinion or what they perceive as a terroristic act, ano na ngayon ang diferensya ng isang terrorista sa isang revolutionary group or a media organization versus a revolutionary group? And Com Louie was talking about the repeal of the Anti-Subversion Act earlier. Com Louie.
Okay, unang-una, yung pakikibahagi sa politika ay isang karapatan, no? Karapatan hindi lang nung makikibahagi, kagaya nga ng sabi ko kanina, kundi pati na nung mga botante na dapat may nasa kanila yung the options are presented before them, no? Nakalatag talaga 'yan. Okay. Okay, ilagay ko lang sa context ng meron tayo ngayon, yung mga ang mas malaking issue dito ay yung mga legal na existing political parties that are being identified with so-called underground movement, at sila ata yung nagiging vulnerable dito sa isyung ito. Now, I don't think they've been classified as terrorists even by definition of the Anti-Terrorism Act, no? So ako yun yung mas pressing na issue, but by and large, no, ang ideal is that you allow the formal political process to accommodate as many political persuasion as possible, which mas gusto mo silang makilahok sa isang halalan at sa mga peaceful political activities than to go underground and use arm to promote their advocacy, no? So ganun lang kasimple 'yon. Medyo dapat mas tolerant ang ating political system at mas inclusive. That's basic in a democracy. Kung democracy pa tayo.
Thought-provoking si Com Louie. At this point, like to ask another question coming from the Facebook Live. It's from Aldwin Renido Gravador. He asks, how will this impact radio stations catering to politicians? I guess the question, just to clarify the question also, ask paano yung mga hard-hitting na mga radio stations tackling corruption issues for that matter. Ito yung sinasabi kanina din ni Lian na what if you're in the business of truth-telling pero at the end of the day, you're hesitant. And so I'd like to ask the question, ano nga ba, like say for example, implications nito to people like Ara na who is in the advocacy for freedom, or to Lian, who is in the business of telling the truth, like how extensive do you think can the effects of the anti-terrorism law affect certain industries and advocacies? Let's start perhaps with Ara.
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Ara, yung question basically is that given nga ito yung pinag-uusapan natin, yung threats about the anti-terrorism law, how will this affect you, your advocacy, and how your stance, given that there is a constant threat to be tagged as a terrorist?
To be honest, no, nung una po talagang lumabas ang Anti-Terror Act, natakot po ako mag-post online. Natakot akong ipahayag yung kung ano man yung gusto kong iparating sa online. Kaya po, sobrang importante na pinaglalaban natin to, na hindi na ituloy pa. Kasi hindi lang, it's a threat not only to our press workers and not only to our attorneys and lawyers that are fighting for our freedom and rights. It is also a threat to the youth who wants to stand up, who wants to speak up about this issue. So kailangan na talaga po itong i-address. Thank you.
Thank you, Ara. Lian, are we seeing less and less of journalists being brave and courageous to tell the truth? What are the effects to the industry?
Well, I would like to say that wala pa namang sumusuko or wala pa namang umuurong na journalist. But yung tanong nga, diba, how will this impact a radio station na hard-hitting? That's precisely what the petitioners are pointing out, na pwede kang mag-broadcast sa programa mo. For example, detailing or providing an in-depth broadcast on activists. Can General Parlades say that you are spreading a lie and therefore are aiding who for him are terrorists? Can you be punished under even providing material support to terrorists or even inciting to terrorism? Yun yung mga risks na sinasabi ng petition. And let me just cite a few examples from the petitions themselves. Sabi ni Justice Carpio, kasi siya, diba, he's a staunch advocate for the West Philippine Sea. Kapag pinagpatuloy niya ba ang kanyang mga column or ang kanyang mga lecture which expresses dissent against China, pwede ba siyang kasuhan under Section 4 of terrorism, which is causing interference with critical infrastructure of government? Kasi yun yung wording sa Section 4 eh. If you cause interference with critical infrastructure, that is under Section 4. At sinasabi ni Justice Carpio, can diplomatic channels be critical infrastructure? Am I interfering with the diplomatic channel? Can I be punished? Ganon. So tapos sabi rin ng petition ng mga law professors from FEU, si Bono daw ba? O yung mga umattend sa concert ni Bono, pwede rin ba daw silang kasuhan ng Section 4 causing interference with critical infrastructure? Kasi if we remember, nung nag-concert si Bono, parang he made the shout out to the likes of Senator De Lima, at parang sinabi niya na he said something like, you cannot compromise on human rights, and that is my soft message to President Duterte. So if you say something like that, can you be considered a terrorist because you're interfering with critical infrastructure? So these are very vague definitions na precisely yun yung laman ng mga petition. And isa pa sa mga binanggit ni Attorney Chel Jokno sa oral arguments, can you punish my state of mind? Kasi pwedeng sabihin ng pulis na, okay, wala ka namang ginawang masama, pero ang intent mo gumawa ng masama. Ang sinasabi ni Attorney Jokno, paano mo ipapunish yung intent ko? It's my state of mind. You cannot punish my state of mind. So that those are the few of the salient discussions sa oral arguments.
Thanks for that, Ian. Another question from John Dave Ang. Ito, I guess, is asking ano na nga ba yung inaantay natin after all of this. Sabi niya, kung sakali daw ma-declare na unconstitutional ang Anti-Terror Act, ibig sabihin po ba nito na magiging definition ng terrorism ay definition na nakalagay sa Human Security Act? But I'd like to bridge this question dito din sa question ni Mac Aldio Belenzo. Sabi niya, if you support the political beliefs of the CPP, even if you're not a member of the CPP, or teach or attend Marxist, Maoist, Leninist, and other revolutionary quote-unquote courses, is there a chance that you will be penalized under the Anti-Terrorism Act? So yun nga po, the question is that what's out there? What lies beyond? Ano nga bang ine-expect natin should the petitions be successful and say, oh, sige, we will scrap the Anti-Terrorism Act? Do we revert to the Human Security Act? And what are now, if does that dissolve the chances of being tagged of being a terrorist? Perhaps we can throw the question to Attorney Tom.
Thank you very much, Mark. Magandang tanong yan, ano? Siguro allow me just the opportunity to comment and say this. I think para maging nuanced din yung ating discussion ng content. No? To be perfectly clear about it, wala naman po talagang universally acknowledged worldwide definition kung ano po ang terrorism. Wala po talaga. No? Even if we look at United Nations documents, wala po. But ang sinasabi ko lang po kanina, and I think this is really true, it doesn't mean that there is no universal definition, that we will have a very broad and a very vague definition. So ito po ang chance actually natin to make a very clear and very precise definition. A definition that will respect human rights and fundamental freedoms. Diba? It doesn't mean na wala pong definition, hindi na po tayo pwedeng mag-define. And sa pagde-define po natin, dapat po maging maingat po tayo. Diba? So, I mean, that's the point there. But to also answer the question, kapag wala na po ang ang Anti-Terrorism Act, no, and it is declared unconstitutional, entirely declared unconstitutional, ang mangyayari po niyan, yes, we will revert to the Human Security Act. If I'm not mistaken, kasi po, no, meron pong, I think, is there a repealing clause? Or
Yes.
there is a repealing clause in the law.
56.
So therefore, if there is a repealing clause in the law, sabihin po ng repeal, tinatanggal na po yung naunang batas. Hindi na yan batas, ano? So dahil sinabi po ng batas na ito na hindi na po yan batas at sinabi po ng Korte Suprema, hindi na rin ito batas kasi labag ito sa Constitution. So babalik po tayo dun sa naunang sitwasyon, Human Security Act. Ano? Yung second part nun is, meron bang chance? Ang sinasabi po natin ay kung malabo po ang batas at hindi po ito malinaw, meron pong chance. Because there is always that slim possibility. No matter how slim, there will always be a possibility. Yan po.
Alright. Thank you for that, Attorney Tom. But I'd also like to it's also an interesting question since na-mention ang Human Security Act. Perhaps you can ask Mike for this one, perhaps even Lian. Is the Human Security Act a better law than what we have? Or are there also reservations about the Human Security Act that we should also be worried? Ano ba yung mga pangamba natin kung meron man? And kung meron man, ano ba yung gusto natin din ma-achieve ultimately from the process, since we're also talking about different rights, freedom of expression, association, freedom to tell the truth, etc., etc. We'll start with, perhaps you can start with Mike.
All right. Actually, one of the concerns kasi tinanggal under the Anti-Terrorism Act yung provision sa Human Security Act which penalizes wrongful prosecution for terrorism, and medyo hefty yung sum. Ang sinasabi dito, wala na yun because ang sinasabi ng mga lawmakers, that was one deterrent daw kung bakit wala masyadong nakakasuhan under terrorism sa Human Security Act kasi daw natatakot yung mga enforcers na singilin sila ng a hefty sum dahil sa wrongful prosecution. So that's why inalis daw yun. Although I note na meron namang certain provisions dito penalizing, for example, furnishing false evidence or forged documents or spurious evidence. 6 years yung penalty, or infidelity in the custody of detained persons, at yung unauthorized revelation of classified materials. Pero yung pinangangambahan na wrongful prosecution, wala doon, ano. And also yung changes kasi, ang kaibahan kasi under the Human Security Act, di ba? Malinaw yung predicate acts, predicate crimes. So unless makonsider na murder or kidnapping yung act na yon, hindi siya pwedeng i-qualify na terrorism kahit pa ang effect nito is to spread fear. So kailangan mo nang ma-meet yung mga requirements ng crimes na yon. Ito ngayon, any act, kapag ang intention is to cause death or physical harm. Although ang ina-argue ng mga justices na iba, you also have to look at the definition dito sa lower part ng definition ng terrorism, taking into account yung nature and context daw. So they're saying na dapat tingnan pa rin ng authorities, hindi lang yung intention, or hindi lang yung kung ano man yung act, you have to couple it with the nature and the context in order to determine the intention. Pero yun na nga, are we absolutely certain na kayang gawin yun ng ating ordinary law enforcers? Yan yung lumalabas, no? Lalo na nilabas ng one of the petitioners itong poster ng isang police unit defining who are terrorists at sinama doon yung mga nagpoprotesta. So for them, ang sinasabi nila, this is proof na vague yung batas kasi ito nga yung interpretation ng mga police. And one of the justices, si Justice Kagiwa, tinatanong nga niya, the fact that General Parlade apologized doon sa kanyang pagre-red tag supposedly sa mga petitioners, is this proof na vague nga yung law kasi pati siya nagkakamali din sa pag-interpret nung batas. So those are issues na kailangan i-settle ng court. I'm not in a position to say kung mas okay ba ang Human Security Act kumpara sa Anti-Terrorism Act. Ang difference lang, mas malinaw kung ano yung pinaparusahan under the Human Security Act.
Ian, is there any concern, like say for example, should the petition be successful at we have struck down the Anti-Terrorism Act? Is it a better place for journalists that we have the Human Security Act, or are there still reservations that we need to look out for?
Yung tanong na, is the Human Security Act better than the ATA? Siguro ang unang tanong doon, is the Human Security Act even good? And even some of the petitioners now in the ATA would tell you it was not even good, because if we can remember, HSA was also heavily contended in the Supreme Court nung naipasa siya. Susundan ko lang yung mga sinabi ni Mike na mga provisions sa HSA na wala na ngayon. Bukod dun sa provision na kapag na-acquit ka, automatic yun, 500,000 pesos per day na nakakulong ka. Kailangan kang bayaran ng gobyerno. Wala na yun ngayon sa Anti-Terror Act. Ngayon sa oral argument, sabi ni Justice Alexis Mundo, pinapayagan ka naman ng civil code na kapag if you were wrongfully charged, pwede kang magdemanda at humingi ng damages. Ang sagot sa kanya ni Attorney Algamar Latif, sa HSA kasi, wala na akong kailangang patunayan. Basta mapawalang sala ako sa kaso, automatic babayaran mo ko. Sa civil code, kailangan ko pa ulit magdemanda. So panibagong proseso na naman yan. Isa pa sa mga provision na wala na sa ATA ay, sa HSA kasi, merong grievance committee that would evaluate complaints against implementers of the law. At the HSA also gave the Commission on Human Rights prosecutorial power over airing law enforcers and public officials. Wala na rin to sa anti-terror law. At very important, related sa topic ni Com Louie, wala na rin sa ATA ang provision sa HSA na dapat automatically suspended ang batas 1 month before and 2 months after any election. So yun yung mga, I can't answer if it's good or if it's better, but those are the facts na nire-raise sa mga petition.
Also, Mark, dagdag ko lang, no? Meron kasing inciting to terrorism provision dito sa Anti-Terrorism Act. That is explicitly covering, or that covers speech, writings. So that goes directly sa freedom of expression, and that affects journalists specifically, na wala doon sa Human Security Act. And ang kabihan lang kasi parang doon sa Human Security Act, kaya hindi nagtagumpay yung facial challenge noon kasi it regulated conduct. Incidental lang daw yung speech. So walang ganitong provision na inciting to terrorism which covers speeches. So ang difference ngayon, you have that provision which explicitly covers freedom of expression. So ang tanong ngayon, i-consider na ba ngayon ng mga justices na this is a freedom of speech case, and so therefore pwedeng apply yung facial challenge at pwede lang i-strike down yung batas.
Thanks for that, Mike. But I think one of the things that we need to continuously do ay magbantay, maging vigilant, and we have to be wary of our rights. So it has been a great day for us to discuss our rights and freedom. And before we close, I'd like to have another round from our speakers and reactors for their final messages. Perhaps we can start with Commissioner Louie.
Kasi kung unang-una, no, we're talking about the Anti-Terrorism Act, no? Sino ba ang nagpasa ng Anti-Terrorism Act? 'Di ba yung po yung mga halal nating mga congressman? No, yung bang congressman at senador, 'di ba ano ba yung proseso? 'Di ba dapat medyo tayo yung nagdidikta kung ano yung ipapasa nila? So I think echoing what Ara said, no? Let's register. Let's vote. But let's not only register and vote, let's take a more active part, no? Hindi lang kasi kung ako lang, isa lang ako. Kung kaming dalawa lang ni Ara, dalawa lang kami. I think it's we have to, you know, network. You have to talk to your neighbors, you have to talk to your friends, you have to talk to everyone. Let this be a campaign for everyone, not for any particular candidate perhaps, but for our people, no? Parang may agenda dapat, ang magdikta dapat ng agenda ng election natin taong bayan eh. Kasi kung minsan nagdi-dictate ng agenda yung mga elite, sila, sino ba kandidato, sino ba yung ganun? Ano ba pakialam ko sino kandidato? Ano ba ang, di ba dapat may pakialam ang taong bayan? Pero dahil sa pandemic, at kung minsan may chilling effect nga yung batas din, hindi natin magawa yun. But we should, I think these are the things that we should be overcoming. Yun lang, let's participate, let's engage. And it's important for us to do that, especially in this time of pandemic.
That's a very important call, no, Commissioner Louis. Go out and register. 2020 is not very far from sight. Let's now move on to Ara. Ara, your final message for our audiences.
Sa mga narinig ko po ngayon, no, Anti-Terrorism Act is really a proof na minamando tayo ng gobyerno. Yun lamang yung gusto kong sabihin. Kaya buti na lang at may mga petisyon na pinangungunahan ng mga tanyag ng mga abogado para ipagtanggol ang ating mamamayan. At sana magrehistro ang mga kabataan na katulad ko dahil napaka-importante ng mga boto nyo, lalo na sa parating na election para sa 2022 election. So I really hope that the youth like me registers to vote, and like what Commissioner Luis said, hindi lang yung pagpaparehistro at pagboboto ang kailangan yung gawin. Kailangan ding full campaign talaga ang gawin, na hindi lang pagre-rehistro, kailangan ding ipakita na involved ka talaga sa mga nangyayari sa ating bansa. Kaya naman sana ay maging edukado pa. I mean, let's be educated with what's happening right now and use this for something better and something proper. Yun lang. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Ara. Let's now hear it from Lian. Lian, please.
Sabi nga ng isang abogado sa isang forum na napuntahan ko, madaling i-weaponize ang batas kapag hindi ito naiintindihan ng mga tao. And I think that's what journalists are here for. That's what Mike and I are here for, is to explain the laws as simply as possible para ma-lessen yung likelihood na i-weaponize siya. Siguro a personal appeal from the journalists is for people to continue engaging with this topic. Show the networks and show the bosses of newspapers that you care about the anti-terror law para mas magkaroon yung mga TV para mas magkaroon sila ng top spot on the newscast. So newspaper reporters get the front page, and for newsrooms to continue funding this coverage, and kasi you dictate naman to some extent the agenda of the newsrooms. Tell them you care about this and let us help you understand.
All right. Maraming salamat, Lian. Let's now hear it from Mike.
All right. I'll just echo the call ni Lian to keep a spotlight on this issue. Oftentimes sa Justice Beat, ang dami-daming binabasang papel, but you often get relegated to just being a reader sa primetime newscast kasi walang interest, walang video. Yung mga tao parang, paano ko maintindihan yan? Magbanggit ka lang ng demurrer, hindi mo na alam kung, alam mo yun, na-turn off na yung mga tao. So we're hoping na with this renewed interest in, lalo na sa Anti-Terrorism Act, ang daming discussion on social media, ang daming gustong malaman kung anong nangyayari. We're hoping na this is a start towards people actually trying to know their rights and what they can do about it, anong mga remedies under the court. And napaka-importante. It's part of a democratic process that the citizens should be able to take part in rule at policy making. No? Dapat noon pa to dapat nung habang pinupropose pa sa Senate, sa House, kaya lang ang nangyari naman, as some petitioners allege, parang niratsada, minabilis, walang thorough discussion. Yun yung allegations nila. And walang masyadong pag-uusap pa until naipasa at na-implement. No? But it's good that we're having this discussion kasi kung wala naman, if nobody raises the question, we won't have this opportunity. I'm hoping na kahit mahirap pakinggan yung oral arguments, sana makinig kayo kasi makikita nyo rin doon merong specific examples kung ano ba dapat yung gagawin mo in a specific situation, ano ba yung mga karapatan mo na hindi dapat malabag ng gobyerno at para saan yun at paano mo isi-safeguard yung mga rights na to. So we're hoping that this will start people getting interested in stories like those that we cover ni Lian. So hopefully we'll be more watchful and mindful of our rights, especially under this administration.
Maraming salamat, Mike. We now head over to Attorney Tom. Attorney Tom, please.
Thank you so much. Bago ko sabihin yung final thoughts, I'm just reminded of, because yung sinabi ni Attorney Mike kanina, I'm just reminded of this very, very old case para sa mga kasama nating abogado or mga law students here. This is a very old case, 1945 case. You will rarely find it cited in present decisions of the Supreme Court. I recently just came across this decision because I was reading the book of my professor, Father Joaquin Bernas. According to, i-quote ko lang Mortera versus Court of Industrial Relations. And Mikey will probably be happy to know. This is a 1945 case. Sabi ng Supreme Court, when the provisions of the law refer to the words and actions that are associated with speech and they have expressive content, those actions express speech. So therefore, in cases like this, I think at the heart, at the core of this problem is really the problem of speech and dissent in society. Katulad ng sinabi ni Commissioner Louis Guia, this is about political participation also, your right to speech. And therefore I say, in this old case of our very own Supreme Court, Mortera versus Court of Industrial Relations, this is about a picketing. A picketing, sinabi ng Supreme Court, picketing is an act that expresses speech. So therefore, in that manner, assembly, advocacy for human rights, they are all speech. Therefore, you can say that the AntiTerror Act is a speech regulation. It is subject to challenge before the Supreme Court. That's what I will say. I guess this reflects the overall mood of the world, where speech, thought, and dissent are disdained. However, I think more than anything else, we should not be afraid to speak out. And there's also that danger of labeling. Labeling. Ano ba talaga ang ibig sabihin ng labels? What do you mean when you're imposed upon by a label or you're relegated or labeled as someone? Para din yung gender, para rin yung sexual identity, para din yung grouping, para din yung pagtawag sa iyo ng names or pagtawag sa iyo ng iba pang mga bagay. I think in the world that we live in now, we should be more tolerant of people. Of course, there are actions that are not and should not be ever done. But I think we should be more tolerant of legal things and things that are part of our identity. So if you are for human rights, you are for freedom, you are for democracy, then you are not a terrorist. You are who you are. Di ba? And I think we should all have that lesson as we go on with our lives. And let's pray and let's wish, let's hope that our Supreme Court is made up of good and very well-educated people, that they will decide for the welfare of the Filipino society. So yun lang, Mark. Maraming salamat. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Attorney Tom. Of course,